Today I'm going to be focusing on how the Jefferson administration dealt with the ongoing war in Europe, these Napoleonic wars, and how collateral effects of that war were starting to have an impact on America, an issue that George Washington and John Adams both had attempted to deal with during their time in office. Jefferson now is having his turn at dealing with this situation. Of particular importance in this situation was the issue of impressment, and basically impressment is the forced service in the British and French navies. So basically, according to British law at the time, a sea captain, a naval captain, had the authority to draft any British subject into service in the Navy in order to fill his crew roster. Ship crews would often find themselves under strength for various reasons, either sickness or disease or loss of life in various battles. For whatever reason, these British sea captains, these naval captains, would find themselves shorthanded, and just the nature of naval operations at the time, a full crew was essential in order for a ship to be effective. So this British law allowed these sea captains to draft any British subject into service as needed. What happened is that the British sea captain would often put into a British port, and he would send a crew of his men into town to clean out the local pubs and basically draft any able-bodied British man for service in the British Navy. Sometimes they would encounter British merchant vessels, and they could draft crew members from that merchant vessel for service on the naval vessel. Even in some cases, British sea captains were authorized to remove any British subject from neutral ships. And here's where the problem really intersects with our story. What happens is that the British Navy, and the French did this too, but to a lesser extent. The British Navy is kind of the biggest perpetrator of this impressment during these years. And they would encounter American merchant ships, and they would pull off people that they thought were British subjects. Of course, the big problem is that it's very difficult for anyone to identify themselves officially as American or English, because most Americans are descended from Englishmen at this time, or they were British immigrants to America. Even if they're American citizens, they look and sound and you are essentially indistinguishable from their British counterparts. So basically, it was what ends up happening is that it's basically the word of the British naval officer against the word of the American sailors. The British Navy ships would stop the American merchant ships and say, okay, we're here to claim any British subjects on board this ship for service in the British Navy. Of course, no one was going to admit they're British subjects, so they're like, you, and you. You're now members of the British Navy. And they're like, we're Americans. We're not British. We're Americans. And the British sea captain is like, prove it. You don't have an ID card. You don't have any papers or any way to prove that you're an American citizen. So basically, at the risk of having the ship destroyed and everyone killed, the British sea captain would pretty much get his way, and he would get these crew members off the ship. So during this time, during these years that this is going on, between 1803 and 1812, in the neighborhood of about 5,000 sailors were forcibly removed from U.S. merchant ships and forced to serve in the Royal Navy. Most of them, the majority of them, were American citizens. A lot of them were, in fact, British citizens. So this is kind of well within the right of the British officer. But a lot of these guys, most of them, in fact, were American citizens. So this is a big problem for the American merchant fleet. We're losing sailors on a regular basis to British impressment, and there's not a whole lot we can do about it, because these merchant ships are in no position to defend themselves against British naval vessels, and so these men are marched away at gunpoint, and there's not really a whole lot they can do. Now, to England's credit, whenever it could be proved that that one of these sailors was in fact an American citizen, the British naval officer would release them. So this wasn't often, but there were a few instances on record where a person was able to verify their American citizenship and the British Navy would release them. In a situation kind of like, for example, a sailor taken by the British Navy claims to be an American citizen. He can't provide proof of it, but he says, okay, well, my uncle is the assistant governor of North Carolina. If you could speak to him, you would see that he could verify that I am in fact an American citizen. And of course, eventually, after a few months or whatever, the sea captain would be able to contact this governor of North Carolina and provide that verification, and they would release him. Again, that's just an example of how this might happen. But the British Navy was pretty true to their rules. They only took what they thought were British citizens, and if it could be proved that that there was a case of mistaken identity, then they would release them in. But by and large, so few people were able to prove their citizenship. They really had no choice but to end up serving in the British Navy. The bottom line is that this issue of impressment is going to have a really severe impact on not just American merchant fleets and trade and commerce, but it's also an affront to our sovereignty as a nation. The fact that some other nation can at will with no accountability at all, literally just come and take who they want off of our ships. This makes America look weak, and we are weak. We're not in a situation where we can really defend against this. Keep in mind, our Navy is so small. We have fewer than 16 naval vessels. Most of those are stationed on the Great Lakes. So due to the Republican drawdown of the U.S. Armed Forces, our Navy is not really in a situation to do anything about this issue of impressment. In fact, at one point, the British were so brazen at this. There's a case in 1807 where a British ship attacked an American merchant ship just off the coast, within sight of the shore. In fact, there was a large crowd of people gathered on the shore watching this battle take place. It was that close. It was in our coastal waters. They stopped the merchant ship. The American merchant captain refused to give up his men, so there was a fight ensued. 3 Americans were killed, 18 more were wounded, and then the British removed 4 sailors from that ship, only one of whom was British. So again, this is kind of a last straw type of situation here in 1807, where this is not happening out on the high seas. This is happening right here in our coastal waters, within sight of American soil. So there's a lot of public outcry over this. There's a lot of pressure on Congress to do something, stand up for ourselves. We need to resist the British. We're defenseless. We're helpless. We need to do something to stop this sort of thing. So Thomas Jefferson and the Republicans are determined to try and do something. Now they don't want a big military buildup, because again, that's just not their way. They don't think that's the answer. So what Congress does, at the behest of the Jefferson administration, Congress passes the Embargo Act. And this Embargo Act basically it puts a lot of trade restrictions on that are aimed specifically at England and France. What the Embargo Act does is it bans all foreign shipping and exports, and basically this is referring primarily to American merchant vessels. No American vessel can visit any foreign port. Now, American ships can still trade within the states, so basically from one state to another they can still trade, but no American ships are allowed to trade in any foreign ports. Now, if a foreign shipping company wants to come to America and continue to trade, that's acceptable. So it's not a total embargo on trade. It's just a restriction of American shipping in foreign ports. So what ends up happening, what Jefferson is hoping to accomplish here, he's hoping that these trade restrictions, again aimed more specifically at England and France, will create enough of a problem for England and France that they will stop their attacks on our ship. He's hoping that if they lose enough business with the United States, that they will stop this practice of attacking our ships. And of course, this would help keep our ships safe as well. Now, this whole thing kind of backfires on the Jefferson administration. What ends up happening, the reality of this situation, is that England and France are not that dependent on our trade. In fact, just the opposite is true. We are more dependent on trade with them than they are with us. So the people who end up getting hurt over this embargo are American businesses. American shipping companies and American merchants end up suffering the most because of this embargo act. It's very costly for a lot of people, especially American sailors. With our ships restricted to ports, our own ports now, there's not as much a demand for sailors as there had been previously. Your ship's not out on the sea. You don't really need a crew, so the crews get laid off. In the neighborhood of about 30,000 American sailors are going to lose their jobs because of this embargo act. And again, it's just because our ships are not active. They don't need any sailors, and these men end up out of work. So it not only is very costly to our economy, but it is very unpopular among American citizens, especially those associated with the shipping industry. So Jefferson is in a situation now where his one big attempt to deal with this issue of impressment has completely backfired. Congress will repeal this embargo act a couple of years later, but not after it has done, but only after it's done quite a bit of damage to our economy. Fortunately for Jefferson, this is the end of his second term in office, so he's not going to seek re-election, which is probably a good thing given the disaster of this embargo act. He probably might not have been able to be re-elected anyway. So election of 1808, we're going to see Jefferson's successor, James Madison, be left with this task of dealing with this war with England and France. So when Madison assumes the mantle of leadership, and this election of 1808 is pretty one-sided. Madison was Jefferson's Secretary of State. Madison was very popular. He was very good friends with Jefferson, so he's got Jefferson's endorsement. Plus, Republicans still hold a majority in Congress, so Madison, as a Republican, he's going to win very easily in this election of 1808, and he will become the fourth president of the United States. So here, this issue that began during Washington's administration, this war in Europe that has escalated into essentially a massive European conflict that has been spilling over into the United States for the past several years, specifically with attacks on our shipping. Although we've done all we could to stay out of this war, it still has an impact on us, and this impact has spread now over 4 presidencies, and our attempt to try and deal with this. Madison takes a little bit different approach. Of course, Congress by 1810, Congress had already repealed the Embargo Act. What Madison offers, of course, he gets Congress to pass this bill called Macon's Bill Number 2. Again, named after the congressman who drafted the bill. Essentially, what Macon's Bill Number 2 does is it restores all trade with both England and France. So basically, we announced to England and France we will trade openly with both countries, no restrictions, in an attempt to get the economy going again. But there's a provision in this bill, a however. However, even though we are trading now freely with both countries, whichever of you, England or France, it doesn't matter, whichever country agrees to stop attacking our ships, we will cut off trade with your enemy. So this is an open offer. This Makin's Bill number 2 is an open offer to England or France. You first come, first serve. Whichever country will agree officially to stop attacking our ships, then we will agree to cut off trade completely with the other country. And this is an attempt to kind of use the British and French rivalry to our advantage. So what ends up happening? Napoleon is the first to jump on this. He sees an opportunity here to stick it to England. So Napoleon announces officially that all French attacks on U.S. ships will cease immediately. And of course, immediately is kind of a subjective term. It takes a while for word to get around to all the French captains. So even after Napoleon makes this commitment, there are still some French attacks on American merchant ships. It's hard to get word to all those people quickly. At any rate, we agree to cut off trade completely with England. So as a result of Makin's Bill number 2, we now trade only with France, and we don't trade at all with England. This is going to further aggravate our relationship with England. We already have a kind of a negative relationship with England right now, with their long history of attacking our ships. Makin's Bill number 2 is going to further aggravate that. Now that we have officially declared that we will no longer trade with England in favor of France, and while this is not an alliance with France, from England's perspective, it looks like an alliance with France. So this perception is going to kind of make an enemy out of England with us. So it does stop a lot of the attacks on our ship, but not completely. And it does. It's a step forward toward that end. While this is going on, while we're trying to settle this issue with the attacks on our ships, we've got some trouble on our frontier. And when I'm talking about the frontier, we're talking about this Northwest territory, this largely unsettled territory north of the Ohio River. Ohio, there's quite a few people living in what is today Ohio, and of course Indiana. There's quite a bit of settlement. So this area is being actively settled by American settlers, but we've got a lot of problems out here, particularly with conflict between the settlers and the Native Americans. As you can see here, there's indication of quite a few different conflicts over this period of time. What a lot of people are assuming out here on the frontier, a lot of these frontier people are assuming that the reason for all this unrest among the natives is that England is instigating it. Keep in mind, Canada is still a British possession. This is still a British colony. A lot of people suspect that English troops operating out of these frontier forts are not only supplying the Indians with weapons, but they are stirring up the Indians against the frontier settlers. Of course, the real reason that the Indians are so upset is that the American settlers are moving in and taking their land. But it's easier for these frontier people to blame England because England is so close by. Plus, we already have this tenuous relationship with England already. So trouble on the frontier is going to further aggravate our relationship with England. Our perception that the Indians are working as agents of the British, it just kind of further upsets this already tense situation. This tension on the frontier is going to culminate in a major battle between frontier militia and a Native American coalition, this Battle of Tippecanoe. Leading up to this, though, a Shawnee chief named Tecumseh he is attempting to build a coalition of numerous tribes on the frontier. Basically, he's attempting to unite all the tribes east of the Mississippi River in an attempt to resist white settlement. Tecumseh is joined in this effort by his brother, known as the Prophet, who is more of a spiritual leader. Tecumseh is more of a political leader. These two together are attempting to organize this large-scale coalition of Indian tribes in an attempt to push back against white settlement. And of course, the flashpoint, this Tippecanoe is a name of a creek or a small river in central Indiana, is where this is all going to kind of come to a head. As Tecumseh is able to unite these Indian tribes, keep in mind traditionally these tribes are very competitive among themselves. There's a lot of tension between tribes. He's trying to get them to stop fighting each other, stop competing against each other, and start working together to throw off or to stop American settlement. And of course, the prophet, his brother, is approaching this from a more spiritual or cultural perspective. Tecumseh is trying to build a political and military alliance. His brother is trying to convince the Indians that culturally speaking, they should resist the temptation to interact with whites, adopting white language, white clothing, trading with white settlers, and so on and so forth. He's trying to encourage Indians to get back to their more traditional roots. And together, this two-pronged effort, a political and a cultural or spiritual effort to unite these Indians, actually proves to be pretty effective. And what ends up happening is that by the time we get to the fall of 1811, this coalition has grown quite large. There's thousands of Indians now part of this coalition, and this is all kind of centering in central Indiana. Well, the governor of Indiana, which is just a territory at this point, it's not really a state yet. Territorial governor William Henry Harrison. He's a well-known Indian fighter. He personally leads the militia in numerous small engagements against Indian unrest in the past. Well, Harrison is going to organize an army of mostly Indiana militia of about 1,000 men, and he's going to march on this Tippecanoe area where this Indian coalition is camped. Kind of taking a look at a map here. Again, Tippecanoe Creek is in central Indiana, and of course, this is where this Indian coalition that Tecumseh has put together is camped. And Harrison and his Indiana militia are going to march on this camp in an attempt to disperse it and put an end to this Indian unrest. As luck would have it, when Harrison arrives in Indiana, or in this Tippecanoe Creek, Tecumseh is not even there. Tecumseh is further south, attempting to recruit more support for his coalition, and he's left his brother, the prophet, in charge of this Indian encampment in Tippecanoe Creek. What happens is that when Harrison and his 1,000-man militia arrive in the area, they set up camp. The prophet sees this as an opportunity to try and strike first. So Tecumseh's brother, the prophet, gathers up his warriors and they attack Harrison's encampment. Of course, Harrison's militia is more than a match for the Indian fighters at Tippecanoe, and they win very easily. So this is a very quick and easy victory for American militia here in Indiana, but it comes at a cost. What ends up happening is that Tecumseh finds out about this. He's outraged, not just at the American militia, but he's outraged at his brother for attacking before they were ready. And so Tecumseh now rushes into the arms of the British on the frontier. So Tecumseh and the remainder of his Indian coalition, they officially joined forces with England because Tecumseh sees this now as the only way that the Indians can effectively resist American settlement is to join forces with the British. So this Battle of Tippecanoe, while it is a glorious victory for Harrison and his Indiana militia in the short term, in the long term it actually pushes the Indians more securely into an alliance with the British. And one little footnote here. In the course of the battle, Americans find that the Indians were using a lot of British weapons, British muskets, and this kind of confirms people's suspicions that the British had been supplying the Indians all along. And of course, Tecumseh's enthusiasm now for a British alliance further confirms the American suspicion that England has been behind this all along, which of course is not really true, but the evidence really goes a long way towards supporting these suspicions. The bottom line here is that the end result of this Battle of Tippecanoe is that it has created even a wider, a wider and deeper rift between America and England, and we're getting close to the point of no return here. Our relationship between England has deteriorated to this point where a lot of people in America, both in the citizenry and within Congress, a lot of people are calling for war with England at this point. But we're not done yet. We still have a couple more wedges to drive between America and England here. Later on, this is the same year as the Battle of Tippecanoe. The same year, down in Florida, there's another incident that will further provoke this tension between America and England. If you'll remember, Florida is still controlled by Spain. Even though America now has possession of the entire Louisiana territory to include New Orleans, Florida is still part of Spain. And when we talk about West Florida, we're talking about basically you take the panhandle of Florida and extend it all the way over to New Orleans, and that is West Florida, what is today the part of Louisiana. So as luck would have it, during 1811 or by 1811, there's quite a few American settlers living in this area of West Florida, in the Florida Panhandle. So there's a lot of American settlers there. Now they're content living under Spanish rule. Most of them are just settlers. They're not. They have no real issue with Spain per se. They're just American settlers living in Spanish Florida. What we do though is that secretly, and this is kind of kept from the public, and it's not announced, it's unofficial. The Madison administration provides kind of covert support for these Americans living in Spanish Florida to organize a small-scale uprising. Basically, there are more Americans living in this area than there are Spanish, so these Americans essentially rise up against the Spanish colonial government in Florida, and they declare their independence. And very swiftly upon declaring their independence, the United States government officially acknowledges this territory of West Florida as independent and annexes it into the United States. So it was kind of an under-the-table deal. It wasn't an organic uprising. This uprising was kind of orchestrated by the American government in an attempt to seize this part of West Florida. Now, it's important to this story because Spain is a close ally of England during this time. Keep in mind, in these Napoleonic Wars in Europe, it's France against everybody. So England and Spain are both allies in this war against France. So while this doesn't have any direct impact on England, the fact that Spain is an English ally, it kind of further aggravates our relationship with England as well. This is clearly an affront to Spanish rule in Florida, and it was orchestrated by the United States. So it just kind of further aggravates our relationship with England. A little bit of a footnote for you here. The way that we seized this territory of West Florida will kind of serve as a model or a precedent. About 35 years after this, we're going to be doing essentially the same thing with Texas. So a little bit of foreshadowing here with how the issue with Texas will play out eventually in very much the same way as events here in Florida. Speaking of territorial acquisitions and land disputes, this is just small part. The seizure of West Florida is just a small piece of a larger story of American desire to expand and grow during this time frame. During the early 1800s, there were a lot of new members of Congress. A lot of younger, most members of Congress at this point are the elders, the men who were there, who established the government under George Washington. These men have been in office for a while. But in the early 1800s, we've got a significant number of newcomers in Congress, younger men from southern states, from some of the newer western states, and these men are ambitious. Sometimes we refer to them as war hawks. They are eager to expand, and they're eager to build American prosperity and American prestige, and they're not afraid of war as a means to facilitate that. So among these younger congressmen, men like Henry Clay from Kentucky and John C. Calhoun from South Carolina, both of whom we will discuss extensively in the weeks to come. These men advocate seizing land. Well, we should just seize all of Florida. We should just take it. Spain is a weak power, and they're focused in European affairs. There's nothing to stop us from taking all of Florida if we wanted to. Let's just grab it, and that way we can use it to expand our own territory. We should do the same thing with Canada. So these war hawks, these younger congressmen, are advocating, let's just go get Canada. Let's just take it. England is occupied with France in this war in Europe, and the British troops they have stationed here in Canada are the B team. They're the second string players. So it'll be no problem for us to just seize Canada and claim all of North America for the United States. So these guys are real eager to start expanding our territory. So these land disputes with England, which have been going on all along, especially in the northeast there, south of the St. Lawrence River, there's a lot of disputed territory between the United States and England in that region. A lot of these war hawks are saying, let's just seize control of it and take it once for all, so there is no more disputes. Let's end the disputes once and for all by just taking this land. Everything on this list, Macon's Bill number 2, this trouble on the frontier culminating in the Battle of Tippecanoe, our seizure of West Florida, and these ongoing land disputes, all of these things happening in a very short space of time, 1810, 1811, early 1812, all of these things are going to have a destructive impact on the relationship between the United States and England. The relationship is already tense anyway. But these things are going to further aggravate that until we get to the point in early 1812, there's a lot of people calling for war with England. We need to let's just go ahead and declare war on England and be done with it, and that way we can achieve all these goals and we can settle all these disputes once and for all. Let's just go ahead and declare war on England. And that's what happens when we get to the summer of 1812. Congress finally gives in to pressure from the American people to declare war. And so in June of 1812, Congress will declare war on England. So this is the official beginning of the war. But as far as the actual fighting goes, the war won't really pick up for a year or more. Initially, this is basically when we declare war against England, not a lot's going on. In fact, England barely even notices. Congress issues this declaration of war in June of 1812. England is like, whatever. England is so busy focused on this European war with France that England barely even notices that we declare war on them in the summer of 1812. In fact, for the first year and a half of this war, England doesn't really pay any attention to us at all. And for this reason, war hawks in Congress are eager to exploit this. We're very aware of the fact that England is not giving us their full attention in this war, and a lot of people are eager to try and take advantage of that. So in the latter part of 1812, first part of 1813, American forces attempt 3 times to invade Canada and seize Canadian territory, and all 3 attempts fail. And this is kind of surprising because a lot of people are convinced that since England is not giving us their full attention, these British troops that are stationed in Canada are not their best troops. The British Navy that's stationed on the Great Lakes, again, this is their second string forces. These are not their primary forces. So a lot of people think it's going to be very easy for us to just invade Canada and seize that territory. But we try 3 times and fail. And this is another example of how American militia troops, and again, the army that we raise here for this war is comprised mainly of militia. Traditionally, militia will fight fiercely and bravely when they are defending their own homes. They're fighting for their own territory, to defend their territory. but in offensive operations, where these militia troops are going to be deployed far away to fight as part of an invasion force, they are largely ineffective. They're just not suited for the task. Their militia are pretty good, pretty decent defenders, but as far as offensive troops, they are not up to that task. So for that reason, the fact that we're relying on an untrained militia, our attempts to invade Canada will all fail. So we don't really see our first significant victory in this War of 1812 until the fall of 1813. The war's been going on for about a year and a half at this point, when we finally see our first significant victory. And this is a naval victory in the Battle of Lake Erie. Captain Oliver Hazard Perry, who's commander of U.S. naval forces in the Great Lakes, Perry will engage the British fleet that's also stationed in the Great Lakes. And we're not talking about the entire British fleet here. This is just a small contingent of British naval forces who are patrolling the Great Lakes, defending their own frontier in Canada. Most of the British Navy is in Europe, engaged with the French. So we're not going up against the full British Navy here, just a small element of them. In fact, the U.S. Navy and British Navy in the Great Lakes are fairly evenly matched here, thanks to the strategies of Oliver Perry, who's a U.S. naval commander in the area. We're going to destroy about 6 British ships and capture the remaining British fleet on Lake Erie. So while this is not a large-scale naval war, it's a relatively small battle when you consider it in the context of this larger war. It's an important victory for the United States. Not just the fact that we were able to hold our own against the British Navy, our traditional enemy here, but once Perry and the U.S. Navy is able to defeat the British on the Great Lakes, our northern border now is much more secure. With the U.S. Navy in full control of the Great Lakes, it pretty much eliminates the possibility of any kind of a British invasion from Canada. Once the British do turn their attention to this war in the United States, they're not going to be able to invade through Canada because our border now, the Great Lakes, are controlled by the U.S. Navy. So this is an important victory because it secures our northern border with British Canada. During the same time frame, again, the Battle of Lake Erie is in September. The Battle of the Thames in and around Detroit area takes place in October. And it's useful to think of these two battles as two parts of the same battle or the same campaign. The Thames River is near the city of Detroit. So the Battle of the Thames is kind of like the land component of this larger campaign. Battle of Lake Erie was a naval engagement. The Battle of the Thames will be a land-based army against army engagement. So the Battle of the Thames, we're going to see again our hero of Tippecanoe, William Henry Harrison, out of Indiana, is leading a federal army now. These, of course, mostly Indiana militia, augmented with the militias from some of the other states, forming a larger U.S. army here. Will fight the British soldiers and Tecumseh's Indian alliance in and around the Detroit area. Of course, this will be another victory for us. Harrison and his forces will fairly easily defeat the small number of British troops and their Indian allies here in Thames River area. So between the Battle of Lake Erie and the Battle of the Thames, the United States has secured its first important victories in this War of 1812. It's important to remind ourselves here that while these are both important victories in and of themselves, we're not facing the full force of the British military at this point. The British Army has hundreds of thousands of men still fighting in Europe. The British Navy has more than 300 warships. And only a very, very small percentage of those men and ships are here in America. So we're not really going up against the full force of the British Army. So while these are important victories, securing our northern border against the British frontier, these this kind of gives America a false sense of victory. We're feeling pretty good about these victories here, these small victories. We're feeling like we can take on the whole world at this point. However, once England is able to turn their full attention toward us the following year, things are going to take a dramatic turn for us, and it's not going to go well. We'll save that conversation for next session. One final point on this Battle of the Thames is that this marks the end of any effective Indian resistance east of the Mississippi River. Primarily because during this Battle of the Thames, Tecumseh, who has been the leader of this Indian alliance for the past few years, he's going to be killed in this Battle of the Thames. And without Tecumseh's leadership, and of course his brother, the Prophet, is out of the picture as well, without Tecumseh's leadership, this Indian alliance is going to unravel. Their defeat, their losses in the Battle of the Thames, especially of their leader, Tecumseh, the Indians are not going to recover from this, especially not in terms of any kind of an effective alliance. So while in the years after the War of 1812, we will see some small-scale Indian resistance to white settlement or American settlement, none of it is very effective. In fact, this is pretty much the last major engagement between Americans and Native Americans during this time period. After this, the Indian resistance east of the Mississippi River will decline steadily to the point where it's almost non-existent. And that's where we're going to leave off for now. When we come back next session, we're going to start looking at what happens with this War of 1812 once England turns its full attention toward fighting the United States. We'll talk about some of the factors that play into that, and of course how that works out for the United States in terms of the war itself, and particularly the aftermath of the war, and why this War of 1812 is so significant. So until then, take care.